Welcome to the Dreamboat. Remember, you can join the DRI for just £30 a year. You get access to more content, including videos and discounts for our events. It's a great way of finding out more about our work, joining our dream community, and supporting this podcast. Details in the show notes and at driccpe.org.uk/membership.
Welcome to the Dreamboat podcast, a place where we talk about everything dreamy, all you wanted to know about dreams and where you might find some answers. My name is Laura Payne and I'm a psychotherapist and associate of the Dream Research Institute, the DRI, here in London, England. And I'm joined by fellow psychotherapist and TV presenter, Melinda Messenger.
Hello, I'm Melinda Messenger and I'm also part of the Dream Research Institute, and together we're a group of dream weavers and catchers, and we're called the Dreamboat because we are recording our podcast by the canal here at Little Venice in London. So listen out for the ducks.
I love talking about dreams, working with them and exploring them. So join us for this fortnightly series when we'll be looking at dreams, talking to experts in the field and answering your questions.
In the show notes, you will find ways of getting in touch with us and the team via the DRI website and on the standard online places such as Instagram and Facebook. And our social media links are all in the show notes. So let's now get on with the episode.
Were you ever told when you woke as a kid that the Sandman had been? Who was this weird mythological creature who'd stick the crunchy bits in our eyes in the morning? I'm joined today by fellow psychotherapist and DRI associate Maria Nazdravan, who is joining the Dreamboat team as a co-host, and she's coming along today to chat about all of those weird sleep time mythological creatures, which for some weird reason we seem to have invented to scare children. Anyway, Maria, lovely to have you on board. You've been working with the DRI and the Dreamboat for a long time behind the scenes, so it's very nice that you've scraped the sand out of your eyes and you've got up this morning to talk about this. Welcome.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I was really hoping I would have a Sandman dream or anything like that before coming on today, but not this time.
So the Sandman, I mean, we've been looking, Maria and I have been looking at quite a few of these sort of mythological creatures, and the Sandman, I'm always fascinated by this stuff because he sort of sits in the same world as Father Christmas and other figures that we ask children to believe in something or someone that comes into their room at night. You know, so on one hand, we're telling children to be aware and be careful around strangers. And on the other hand, we have a whole host of mythological creatures who are allowed to come in while they're sleeping. It's an interesting mix. I know we're going to talk about children's dreams separately as a separate podcast, but I remember when my mother told me about the Sandman, thinking it was all a bit sort of creepy. Even as a child, I thought it was creepy. And I came to the UK, or came back to the UK from Canada as a child. And we, in the UK in that era, they didn't have things like central heating. So you'd wake up in the morning and my mum there would be ice on the windows with all these weird and wonderful patterns. And my mum would say, oh yes, Jack Frost has been. I was thinking, who is this Jack Frost?
What does he want?
What does he want? Exactly. So the sort of Sandman for me sits in all of that. And even now, you know, getting on a bit as I am, you know, the peeling the sort of crunchy bits of sleep sand out of your eyes in the morning always makes me think of the Sandman. What do you make of it, Maria?
Well, I didn't have this mythology growing up, so I'm very curious. You said you found it a bit creepy as a child. Were you scared of this kind of mythological figure coming in?
Well, yes, because there is an element of fear. And I know in several cultures for the Sandman, it's mainly Northern and Eastern European as a figure. And it was seen as something quite sort of sinister slightly. I know that Hans Christian Andersen took it as a fairy tale and made it, I can't remember the name of it was, I think it was called Oneiroi. Is it Ole,
Yes.
or Oneiroi was the name of Hans Christian Andersen's figure. And obviously Hans Christian Andersen, the person behind, the writer behind things like The Little Mermaid and The Ugly Duckling. And and the Sandman, the Hans Christian Andersen Sandman, was a benevolent creature that came at night for children, but not in all cultures.
What I liked about that tale was that he seems to be a dual kind of figure, where there's the Ole Lukoi, or however you say it correctly, who comes in and opens this beautiful umbrella for kids who have been good. So if you've been good and you've got a good report card, he opens this umbrella with images at night, and you are delighted and you're taking in this magical realm. And in the story, there's, I think, a dream for every night of the week where this kid is really engrossed and, things come to life in his room, and it's really special. But if you've been bad and you have a bad report card, he opens a different umbrella where there are no images and you get no dreams. And I found that really interesting, because then kids would have restless nights and they would feel quite bad and, restless the next day. But then at the end of the story, Ole, the Sandman, introduces the kid in the story to his brother, who is called the same. And I found that really, really fascinating, because his brother, he said, is also called Death and is on a horse. He looks beautiful. He looks exactly like the normal Sandman. And the same, he takes good kids who've got a good report card on the front of his horse and shows him beautiful things. And the bad kids go on the back and they cannot get off the horse. And I think that leads into the nightmares that you were talking about, that you can't get out of a nightmare. You're just stuck with it. And I found that really interesting, and made me think of Hillman a lot, and the idea of the association of dreams and death. And I don't know if Hans Christian Andersen was thinking of that when he was writing the story, but that's what popped into my head.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of children's stories, fairy tales, have an aspect of death. It's almost as if you're, in a gentle way, prepping the child's mind for the harshness of life, particularly back in the 18th, 19th century. And a lot of these mythological creatures at night are from an oral tradition. They haven't been written down. They've been told as stories over the centuries and passed down. You talking about nightmares, I found quite interesting, because nightmares, when I was having a look at it, is an Old English concept. And it was a demon. It was a sort of like a war horse. And apparently a nightmare, though they're not technically associated, from some reports, with the notion of a mare being a female horse. These were very emaciated stallions, apparently, who were about 6 feet tall, which is about 1.8 meters, and at the shoulders, and had night black coats, apparently. And they had a war horse-like exterior, but that was completely superficial. In fact, what they really had when they presented properly were these huge heads and fangs-like vipers, and malevolent dark eyes, which were often illuminated by red-hot flames. Now I'm starting to think of a dragon, in the sort of notion of the mythological dragon when I hear that, particularly as they apparently spouted orange fire from their nostrils. No wonder why it's associated with a nightmare. And apparently they were sort of wreathed in fire, and their manes were wild and their tails unkempt. And again, they turned to cinders and quickly dispersed upon death. And so somehow or other, these mythological creatures have become associated in the Old English world, or with it's where we've got the word nightmare from, but with the notion of a nightmare. Quite, yeah. Scary.
That's fascinating.
Particularly as a child.
Yeah, absolutely. It's scary, but it's fascinating. I never thought of the meaning of nightmare as a nightmare. And it's so interesting to hear that that definition.
Yeah.
And it's, again, the link with the horse. It's again, similar to the story of Hans Christian Andersen. There's something about that horse, and death is often presented in tarot imagery as riding a horse. So it seems like there's something archetypal at the core there within all of these stories.
There was one of the other ones I looked at was the notion of the Baku. I don't know if you managed to sort of catch up with that, which is the sort of Japanese version of the Sandman. And the Baku was, again, animalistic. It was believed to be a creature that would come and eat up your dreams and your nightmares, and was traditionally depicted as having the body of a bear, the head of an elephant, the tail of an ox, legs of a tiger, and eyes of a rhinoceros. The thing I find interesting is that if it's an ancient Japanese sort of mythical figure, where did they get the idea of a rhinoceros and some of these creatures that were never seen in Japan? So I'm a bit confused about that one. But again, animals.
That's just that's just the psyche at work.
Yeah, probably. Exactly.
Was he a scary figure in their mythology, or was he kind of a neutral?
Well, I think it was fairly neutral. I think in many ways this part of it was benevolent in that it would eat up nightmares, but not the fact that it would eat up dreams, which is interesting. And any Japanese listeners, we'd love to hear from you and find out a bit more about the Baku, because it's obviously slightly different from the Western culture's presentation of a mythological dream figure.
I do find it interesting that these mythologies around dreams and these characters that would show up and eat your dreams or bring you dreams, what comes up for me is the appreciation of dreams in that culture. I grew up in a culture where, at least for me, there was nothing around this. And I think that made me not pay attention to my dreams so much. But if someone had told me the Sandman comes at night and sprinkles dust in your eyes so you can sleep and dream, or, this character opens an umbrella of images just to delight you and introduce you to this magical world, oh my God, I would pay attention to my dreams.
Exactly. That is the sort of the sweeter version of some of the sort of presentations of the Sandman, definitely. And I really like it a lot. Out of interest, I think you looked at some of the old Celtic ones, the Care.
Yeah, I was looking through the mythological figures that come up in dreams, and the one that drew my attention most was this. He's not really a deity. He's a sort of mythical figure called Cernunnos, and he's a Celtic mythic figure. Interesting, again, a mix of human and animal. So the animal comes back in. He's often depicted as having antlers or horns, and he holds a snake in one hand, and in the other hand he holds something that I think is called a torque. I hope I'm not mistaken here, which is kind of like a golden necklace. And he seems to be a pagan sort of figure associated with the wild things, with nature. But what I found interesting in digging a bit and learning more about this figure is that he often appears in people's dreams now as an invitation. He lures them in dreams to the forest, into the dark of the forest, and into the magical realm of animals. And in reading about him, I found that he's often associated indeed with animals, with our animalistic nature, with the dark of the forest. He's somehow the god, or seen as the god of agriculture, of nature, but also of death and rebirth, and the underworld. So that was a very interesting theme for me of, again, the riches are in the underworld. He made me think a lot of other gods that are horn gods in mythology, Pan in Greek mythology, as the god of nature in a way, and also sexuality. He was often depicted with the phallus. So there's a similarity there with that. There's also there are associations for me with the god Saturn, Kronos, as, again, god of nature and the cycles of nature, honoring our relationship to it. And the sort of devil in the tarot, and I think that speaks to kind of our our view of nature these days, and how Christianity has kind of put a interesting twist on the lower, and I'm using inverted kind of quotes here, but our lowest nature, our animalistic nature, that's kind of devilish and something to be repressed. So yeah, I found Cernunnos really interesting. I was looking through people's dreams that they posted online, and often it is this initiation for them, people who are not involved in any way in pagan or Wicca or any kind of witchcraft, and they have this dream of a man with antlers, or a green man. He's often shows up as a green man,
famous green man,
who's inviting them to nature, and they often do follow that call, and they get interested much more in their local community and the local nature. He seems to be a kind of eco-psychological, very, very eco-psychology oriented god. Really fascinating.
Yeah, I like all of that. I think, the Celtic myths are so rich with imagery that, as you say, this wonderful, they're quite thick usually when you see them represented, the gold torque collar, which was a sort of symbol of power and wealth, but also alchemically, so powerful as an image of transformation and the ultimate spiritual goal as such. And I love, and the Celtic myths often have, obviously, the wonderful use of animals like the stag or the deer, and as bringers of peace, and often seen as psychopomps, that again, a creature that comes from the other world or the other side to bring a message back for those in this world. And so beautiful imagery of the Celtic dream god as such represents. I also like the fact he comes with a snake, because obviously in the sort of Celtic myth, it's the adder is the only snake in the British Isles as such, or in the Celtic world, that would be poisonous. And again, I was thinking, we've talked about this before, but the Greek mythology around snakes and dreaming is such a powerful image. And again, an image of healing, of transformation, that the snake can again represent. It can be something both healing as well as something associated with death if it's poisonous. And it's again one of these really subtle dual images that's quite nice. I'll use the snake word, slippery in interpretation.
I'm with you. I find it interesting that he holds a snake. It made me think of Asclepius as well. And the other association that I had by reading about him was also Pluto, Hades, the god of the underworld. And it takes me back again to Hillman and his view on dreams as being, very closely related to death and to the underworld, because Cernunnos, does draw you into the dark of the forest, and that's where you find the riches. And that is very similar to Pluto, initiations by Pluto, where he draws you down into the underworld. Think of Persephone or Inanna. They're kind of, they're kidnapping in a way by Pluto and going down into the underworld. The loss, the terror, again, we're thinking of nightmares here, the facing of the shadow, everything is taken from you. But down in the underworld is where the riches, where the gold is. And I remember from my astrological studies that Pluto means riches, because in the end, the riches of the earth are within the earth, thinking of all the precious metals and everything like that.
Yeah, very nice. I was also thinking while you were talking of the First World War poet, Edward Thomas, who wrote a poem. He died actually in the First World War, like a lot of those poets. And he wrote a wonderful poem, I think it's called Sleep, which is really about death, and how he wanders into the forest. And it's beautiful. I'll find a link for it and I'll put it in the show notes. But again, tapping into the notion of wandering into the dark forest, a bit like falling asleep, and that, you could fall asleep and then the next stage could be death. And and for a lot of people, what a great way to go. It's a very peaceful way to pass. And there's these levels of consciousness that take us all the way down to obviously, dying, and how some of these mythological creatures tap into that, and possibly are tapping into the fear that if as part of the human condition, when we sleep, do we die? Would we die? And that there is obviously a close link between the two states in some way. But will we wake again is perhaps an unconscious fear that's being explored.
And we do die in a sort of way, right? The ego consciousness, quote unquote, again, dies at night when we sleep. You gave a very enlightened and beautiful example of a poem. What comes up for me is a bit less enlightened, but it's the song Enter Sandman by Metallica. I am a Metallica fan. I'm sorry. But I've loved that song my whole life. And when we were discussing this episode, I was like, oh, let me actually reread the lyrics of that song and think about it a little. And it's a song precisely about going to sleep. And it's written for children almost in a way. I don't know if you know the lyrics to it. And it's a bit scary. And again, it speaks to an initiation, because at some point they say, you go to sleep and you're not going to have dreams of Snow White. You're going to have dreams of dark things. And I think it's death and war and things that will frighten you. So it seems to be, a song about nightmares and the kind of initiation that kids might go through when they start to dream about this darker side of the psyche or the darker side of life. And there's a prayer at some point, of asking, pray the Lord my soul to take, should I die before I wake? So again, that fear of death coming through sleep, it's actually a really fascinating song. I was reading a bit about why they might have written it. And I think part of it is about nightmares. Part of it is also about the connection between dreams and sleep. And also someone was speculating that it might be related to, I forgot what it's called, the infant sudden death syndrome or something like that, where, again, infants suddenly die in their sleep as well. So really interesting that we keep, wherever we go and whatever figure we're going back to, we're going back to death in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Talking of some of the ancient figures, you were making me think about the Oneiroi when we were talking about Pluto and the Greeks. And obviously we've spoken a lot about Asclepius as a god of healing, but also using dreams as a healing tool. But the Greeks had lots of other figures, like Morpheus was actually the god of dreaming, but he had these winged spirits, daemones, I think they're called, which were called the Oneiroi. And apparently they emerged each night like a flock of bats, apparently, from a cavernous home in Erebos, which was the land of eternal darkness beyond the rising sun. I mean, the Greeks were so brilliant with devising these really, really image-fused myths, quite something else. And apparently the Oneiroi would pass through one of two gates, the Pili. And the first of these was made of horn, which was the source of the prophetic God-sent dreams, while the other, constructed of ivory, was the source of dreams, which were false and without meaning, so the misleading dreams. And they also had a term which was melos oneros for the black dream, which is what we would call the nightmare. And so Morpheus was their leader, apparently, in some of the legends, and he would bring messages from the gods in the dreams. And so, again, culture upon culture, fascinated by dreams and also by nightmares, has sort of found figures almost to explain it in a mythological way. Well, they've become myths, obviously, over the centuries, but I from childhood, we're immersed in this stuff.
Yeah. And I love the Greek mythology because it's such a rich pantheon of gods. And Morpheus, I think, was the son of the god of sleep. What's his name? Hypnos. And the goddess Pasithea, I think, the goddess of relaxation and hallucination. And then, yes, he had all these other gods around him to help construct the dreams. And the idea as well that the dream is sent by the gods. It's a message. It's something from deeper to the dreamer. Really, really fascinating.
Yeah. Again, in modern day sort of adaptations, for the Jungian, this is rich material. And I know that, like me, you're fascinated in Jungian psychotherapy, psychology, analysis. And one of the most powerful things you can do when you're in analysis is to draw your dreams. And very often you are drawing unconsciously some of these characters that come back on a regular basis. And I love them. You become quite attached to them once you start recognizing them coming back round on a regular basis.
You start to build a relationship with them, right? It takes me back to my research on Cernunnos and looking at people who've had a dream of him and then started reading about him and immersing themselves in Celtic culture. And then the god comes back and it becomes it becomes a real relationship with the god that they cultivate in real life through ritual or through prayer and offerings. And then the god comes back with messages and keeps kind of supporting their individuation, if we want to use a Jungian term for that. Yeah.
Well, I think, is there anything else you wanted to add, Maria? Anything else that you've discovered as part of your dive into this for today?
I think it's just interesting how many of these figures there are in other cultures and mythologies. And for me, I mean, without going into them too much, it speaks to how important dreams are and how important dreams have been throughout our history in humanity. And we've all the cultures created some sort of god or some sort of mythic figure that initiates them into the mysteries. And those mysteries are sometimes beautiful and sometimes they're really dark. But they are an initiation.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's the notion of the mind when it's sort of almost switched off and allowed to free flow in dreams from childhood onwards, that when we wake, we're fascinated by that world, and we almost invent these figures to have a handle on it. But I think the importance is in it starts in childhood in a bid to perhaps help explain the inexplicable sometimes to a child, and to help, it's a pacifier in some way.
Yeah.
Maria, thank you very much for coming on board. I've enjoyed our little dive into the mythological world of some of these characters that haunt us at night time. I will say sweet dreams as always. I don't know. Have you got a signing off, Maria? Is there anything from Metallica that you fancy?
Oh gosh, maybe for another time with the Metallica. It was really a pleasure to talk to you about this, Laura, today. And yeah, sweet dreams, everyone. Hope the Sandman opens the right umbrella for you tonight.
So, thank you for joining us for this week's episode. Don't forget to like us and leave comments on your favourite podcast platform. As I'm sure you know, that's the way we build an audience for the Dreamboat podcast, and also to spread news about dreaming. And as we said, there are many ways you can share your dreams at the DRI, the Dream Research Institute.
Yes, we have courses, events, and workshops, and we want to hear from you. So check out the show notes for links, or find us on Instagram and on our Facebook page and on our website at driccpe.org.uk. And if you want to explore your dreams further, or you would like to support us, you can join the DRI as a member for just £30 a year. As a member, you will get discounts for all of our events and short courses. You'll get our newsletter with latest dream research news, and we'll also be adding other special member benefits during the year. Of course, members' dreams will always be given preference for reading on the podcast Dream of the Week slot. So go to the link on the show notes and become a DRI member today. Keep dreaming and keep sharing your dreams.